the man who has written a very, very thought-provoking article for the Bitcoin Times, Drew Armstrong. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you very much, Luke. It's a pleasure to be on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you face-to-face over the internet. And I think a great place to start today's podcast is to talk a little bit about the fourth law of thermodynamics. Most people know there's three. We're taught about them in school. But in your most recent essay talking about entropy, you mention or you talk about the possibility of a fourth law of thermodynamics. So maybe we could break that down for the listener.
Yeah, sure. So first, I would say that I'm not sure the fourth law has solidified its place in call it the broader physics community, but I do think it's an interesting idea, and that's why I like to write about it. So in summary, the first three laws of thermodynamics are first, that energy is neither created nor destroyed, it's conserved. The second is that two hot bodies, when connected to each other, if one is hot, if there's a hot body connected to a cold body, the heat will dissipate from the hot to the cold body until the two are the same temperature. This is the reason why ice melts, and this is the basis for entropy, really, which can just be thought of as order naturally giving way to disorder, as things go on, these things progress over time. And that really, entropy, the second law, is really what the essay is about, and really the idea that's fascinated me over the last 5 years now. The third law of thermodynamics refers to the lowest possible temperature, namely absolute zero, which is 0 degrees Kelvin or negative 273 degrees Celsius. But the idea is basically the fourth law, first came to me, or I first learned about it when I was having a conversation with Drew Armstrong back in 2021. Myself and AJ Scalia, who together we run a Bitcoin mining company called Cathedral Bitcoin. We were writing an essay called Bitcoin Mining and the Case for More Energy. And we were really focused on this idea of entropy, because what matters really with respect to energy is not so much just like the energy content, but the order of the energy. To what extent is this energy, can we control energy? Can we dispatch energy? Can we use it to improve our lives? And really, to quote Mark Mills and Peter Huber in their book Bottomless Well, it is the order of energy that's important. And so we were talking with Drew, and Drew basically just sometimes you're having conversations and he'll drop these little brain candies, and one of them was born from the question, why does order develop at all? And to this end, there is this idea of potentially a fourth law of thermodynamics, which is that basically the universe solves for the path of steepest entropy ascent, or that perhaps the universe solves for perhaps the outcome that occurs is that which is most successful at increasing entropy. And basically the idea being that whenever you create order locally, you must shed entropy elsewhere by an even larger margin. Basically, there's no free lunch, and so if you have say a hot room on a summer's day and you want to cool that down, the only way you can cool the room down and basically create a temperature differential, which would basically be defined as or could be characterized as a low entropy state, you would need to shed waste heat elsewhere. So you think about like an air conditioning unit. You put one hand on the cold side, one hand on the hot side. The only way you are able to cool down one side of the room or one side of the AC unit is to shed heat elsewhere, thereby increasing entropy elsewhere. So basically the idea is, why does order develop at all? If you accept this idea, this conjecture of the fourth law of thermodynamics, then the reason order develops is because that's the fastest way to accelerate entropy elsewhere. So I know I've thrown a lot of new concepts at a listener, and I've done it in a rather ham-fisted way. But that basically is the fourth law of thermodynamics, and why I find it so interesting.
I think it's absolutely fascinating, and maybe one of those new terms we can break down for the listener, because your article is all about entropy. I believe it was titled On Entropy. So maybe we can actually define that simply for the smooth brains like myself.
Yeah, no, and I consider myself a smooth brain as well. So if, hopefully this will be an effective explanation. But so as I mentioned, first three law of thermodynamics, the first is the conservation of energy. The second refers to entropy, and we'll double click on that. And then the third refers to the lowest possible temperature, absolute zero. Now I will note that there's also a zeroth law of thermodynamics, but that's less relevant here, and I try to keep the physics minimal because of my smooth brain. And so let's dive a little more into the second law. I mentioned how the simplest way to think about the second law of thermodynamics is a hot body connected to a cold one will eventually give off heat until the two are the same temperature. As I mentioned, this is the reason why ice melts. This is also the reason why, if you have a cup of tea, eventually you leave it out long enough and it becomes room temperature. Now, the reason it's room temperature is because it gives off heat to the room around it. And so there's a slight increase, maybe a minuscule increase in the temperature of the room. But what really is happening is the cup of the hot tea is meeting the temperature of the room and the air around it. And they're kind of meeting in the middle, so to speak. One other way you could think about entropy is more in the context of, say, like particles. So let's say you have a cube, you have a little box, right? The box has nothing in it except for a handful of gas particles. Now, if all those gas particles are gathered up in the top right corner, this tiny little corner of the box, then that is that might be called also a lower entropy state than if they're evenly diffuse and evenly spread out. There is something more ordered about this cluster of particles in the top corner versus them kind of like flowing randomly. And importantly, and then this, I think, example really highlights one other aspect of entropy, which is that it's probabilistic. Really, the way you can think about what makes each of those states, what makes one more ordered than the other, it really is the fact that it is less probable that all of the particles would group up into that top corner than for them being kind of diffuse and flowing throughout the box. And it also kind of gets at just another core concept here, which, and again, this is why I think I let myself go and write for about 5,000 words about entropy, because there really is so much to cover here. But not only is entropy probabilistic, but really, when we think about what's a more ordered or less ordered state, which can also be thought of as like lower entropy or higher entropy, right? All these particles in the top corner of a box, this would be considered low entropy. All of the, if the particles are all spread out amongst themselves, then this would be considered, higher entropy and more like homogeneous. One of the key difference is really distinction, right? There is more distinction in the former example than in the latter. To quote Drew Armstrong again, entropy tells us how the energy of a system is distributed throughout its parts. So there being distinction, there being a sort of cluster all stuck in one area, and then the rest of the space being empty space. Or if we think about a cold living room on a hot summer's day, there is distinction there, and that distinction is really what would define a low entropy state, or would make one state lower entropy than another.
I think that's a great explanation. Speaking of Drew Armstrong, I did not plan on asking you anything about this topic because it's a little bit unrelated, but for anyone tuning in, he has a fascinating theory about Bitcoin and space travel and how the two might interrelate. Do you have any thoughts or theories on how we may use Bitcoin or a different currency if we actually do become an interplanetary species?
Yeah, so I think Drew is... and you're, of course, referring to the Bitcoin Astronomy series that he's published on the Unchained Capital blog. Now, I think Drew is absolutely correct. As a Bitcoin miner, there is a point where you can move so far away from Earth that you can you'll no longer be very effective at mining on the Bitcoin blockchain, because if the speed of light is in fact the speed limit of the universe, then you can only transmit information at that rate. And so there's a point, if you move so far, say to Mars, you might be unable to effectively mine because you're mining old blocks that have already, the miners on Earth have already found the next block. You're basically stuck in the past. At that point, it might make sense for you to start your own blockchain. Maybe that is relevant more to your planet, with the center of hash, as Drew would say, much closer to your location. The idea becomes, I think, very interesting and starts to expand. And this is moving through the subsequent parts of his piece, where you potentially then would need, if you have these different planetary blockchains, you might need a sort of a stellar blockchain, or potentially even an interstellar blockchain. And so you might have, when we think of layers in Bitcoin, we typically think of, Bitcoin is layer 1, Lightning is layer 2, but this is a whole new layered approach where you might have different blockchains, kind of at different neighborhoods of the universe, that then will settle to a much larger blockchain with much longer block times, given how far these different nodes are. And then, of course, Drew basically terminates or ends the series in a way that I reference in mine, which is that eventually it might make sense to think that the all sufficiently intelligent life will obviously settle on proof of work based money, because it's fair, and because obviously the blockchain is the best way to have censorship resistant money and peer-to-peer cash, something that any sufficiently intelligent life form would care a great deal about. So the idea that Drew arrives at, which is interesting, is that perhaps the way we will, or intelligent life communicates and finds other intelligent life, is not by sending a flying saucer to the front door, or sending aliens as emissaries. Perhaps they would send instructions as to how to build a node so that they can participate in this interstellar blockchain, this galactic blockchain, and perhaps whether or not you're capable of not only processing transactions but potentially mining blocks, or sorry, processing blocks, and populating your own version of the blockchain. Perhaps it's also a test of your own prowess technologically. If you're sufficiently low on the Kardashev scale, you won't be able to mine and compete in this call it with the intergalactic miners. But if you say have unlocked things like nuclear fusion or maybe other advanced energy technologies, perhaps then you will actually be able to be a full-blown member and be an economic actor on the on that network. So sorry, I've basically just I've ranted at you now for too long.
So I wanted to quickly interrupt today's video with Drew to actually let you guys know that if you're enjoying this one so far, you're going to love our free newsletter that we publish on this topic. You can find that one linked down below in the description of today's video. If you want to read Drew's article, you can actually find it also linked down below in today's video. And if you want to actually get Drew's article alongside 6 other articles from some great Bitcoin authors that include names such as Marty Bent, Alex Svetsky, as well as Gideon Powell, you can actually find the energy edition of the Bitcoin Times also linked in the description of today's video. And if you do want to get your hands on that collectible, you can get 21,000 Satoshis off the full price of that one if you use a promo code CoinBeast. And with all that said, I hope you use that to get yourself a nice little post-Christmas gift. And let's get back into the rest of today's video with Drew.
About fun things that I've been reading late at night over the last few years. But I think Drew was, I think that's one of the most brilliant series. And the first essay that I've ever written, I ever wrote about energy with AJ, called Bitcoin Mining in the Case for More Energy. The way I thought about it at the time was maybe this is Bitcoin Astronomy 0.5, kind of the prelude to how do we get to this point where we actually are engaging in interplanetary travel and even talking about these different planetary blockchains.
Oh, that's absolutely fascinating. I certainly don't regret asking you that question that I wasn't planning on asking you. I think I might have to get you back for a part 2, and we can talk about Drew's fascinating series that he has written. Maybe we come back to your article though, because I think it's a fascinating one, and you kind of talk about what are the core things that have driven our population from growing so rapidly from 200 million people to 8 billion people. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about energy densities and why we do continue to use more dense forms of energy.
Yeah, so in hindsight, this is a point that I didn't reference as much in this piece as I have in the past. But, there's the obvious kind of human element, which is we're going to want more energy. We only have so much space. So the more dense our forms of energy production, the less space we need to produce the same amount of energy, or the more energy we can produce on the whole if we use the same amount of space for energy production regardless. As I mentioned in this article, really you can think about energy density in 2 ways. One, in terms of the energy content per unit of mass, joules per gram, for example. And the other is in land use. And so land use would be how many watts or how many joules per second can we produce given a particular unit of land. If we think about just kind of taking a step back and not thinking so much through the lens of entropy, but just in life, if you have a little clump of coal, that's going to produce a lot more energy than the same weight or the same volume of, say, wood, right? There's just more energy density in that coal. There's even more energy there's even more energy content in that same unit of uranium. And so, thinking about as time has evolved, or as humans have evolved over time, we've basically done a really good job of just finding more and more clever ways to use different materials to produce even more forms of energy, right? I think you can summarize it in just humankind's evolution and advancement. It can really just be characterized as our becoming more and more adept at using more and more energy. And the best way to do that, we can either be making more timberlands to cut down more trees to burn more wood, or we can unlock a technology that has orders of magnitude more energy in that same unit of mass. I mean, this is like, it's fossil fuels and coal that really unlocked the Industrial Revolution and allowed humanity to start supporting these billions of lives that we have today. So that's one. I think the second then is density with respect to like land use. That obviously is I think there's something dystopian when you see these pictures of entire fields just covered with solar panels, these rolling hills covered with solar panels, clearly not hospitable for animal life or human life. And you think about, or wind farms, much the same. But then you compare that to, say, Diablo Canyon, the last nuclear power plant over in California, and it produces roughly 10% of California's electricity, and it's just on a little 12-acre plot of land. And to me, it just seems that not only, now we return to the concept of entropy, that's just a lower entropy, more sophisticated way to produce power. Lower entropy, again, as we think about entropy, tells us how the energy in a system is distributed among its parts. If you have all that energy being produced by this tiny little plot of land, there's a huge distinction there between the reactor and then the free space, the free land right next to it. And I think that is like, if we think about humans as having this destiny of ascending the Kardashev scale and using more energy to increase prosperity and human flourishing, then it seems natural that we'll use the densest energy technologies in order to produce the most energy for humans, so that we're freed up to focus on more sophisticated, interesting, creative tasks.
I think that's fascinating. And I do want to come back to maybe discussing the Kardashev scale in just a moment. But I wanted to quickly read a quote from your essay, because it's kind of related to this and the green movement. So you say, "This too is a dirty little secret of the green movement. The West is not eliminating carbon emissions, just outsourcing them. The entropy must go somewhere." So maybe let's talk a little bit more about green. Is the green dream, is that our new form of dense energy we've found around the world, or is it not?
Certainly not, I don't think. Yeah, the wind and solar are some of the oldest energy technologies that humanity has known. And I'm all for the Lindy effect, but I think here it doesn't play. I think, for example, agriculture can be thought of as using solar energy to, basically produce and farm carbohydrates. Wind, obviously, we've been using windmills for a very long time as well. I think the main issue with these two, though they're fuelless technologies, so concepts of joules per kilogram or joules per gram don't make sense in this context, because there's no fuel. In terms of land use, they're substantially less dense than technology like nuclear energy or technology like natural gas. And I think maybe this also ties into another aspect of how different energy technologies might be lower or higher entropy than others, which is they're just not dispatchable. You can't call on the sun to shine. You can't call on the wind to blow. Famously, folks with long memories might remember in September 2021, there was a 2-week sort of wind shortage in the North Sea. And this sort of catalyzed the European energy crisis of 2021, 2022, where this temporary lull in wind energy resulted in the UK government having to pay, I think it was something on the order of magnitude of £6,000 per megawatt hour for an old coal plant to turn on to create some backup energy. And so to me, this seems like a very, if you just think about it from an engineering standpoint, from a design standpoint, this feels like a very ill-conceived system. Obviously it's quite in vogue these days, but I think, getting to my point around outsourcing carbon emissions, the reality is that most of this is made using Chinese coal. And so this not only is it made using Chinese coal, but then it's then shipped via diesel freighter, to a country near you or a neighborhood near you. I forget the exact percentage, but back in 2022, I remember reading that 40% of, I believe it was either Europe or Germany's renewable energy came from American biomass, basically American wood chips that are cut down in America, processed, and then shipped via diesel freighter to a power plant in Europe where they're just burned. And of course, wood chips are much less energy dense than even coal. Meaning, you're basically creating even more emissions in doing this. And so I think, as I've written about this last year with AJ Scalia again in the Cathedral Bitcoin shareholder letter, where we discussed basically this Malthusian impulse, where it seems so stupid. One can only wonder what's the motive here. And it seems like that underlying motive is there should be less CO2 emissions on the whole. The best way to do that is to make energy more expensive, more scarce, and potentially to even reduce the human population as well, because rising energy costs are in fact a regressive tax. So anyway, this is I feel like I've just continued to trigger me to go down these rants here, but I think yeah, so I think that's sort of my thoughts on the green movement. I don't think it's just about the energy. I don't think it's possible to have an energy system with only wind and solar and batteries. And so I think these are dangerous narratives that need to be pushed back against with vigor.
Yeah, very dangerous. That's one way to frame it. What happens when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine? You're in absolute shambles. Maybe you mentioned Cathedra there. I would love to know a little bit more about your background and what led you to working at Cathedra Mining and what you guys are doing there.
Yeah, definitely. So I studied philosophy and economics in school. So unfortunately, if I was smart, I would have learned more about thermodynamics then, but I was forced to be to teach myself thereafter. I started out working in investment banking here in New York. Immediately hated my life and fell in love with Bitcoin around the same time as AJ Scalia, who's my best friend from childhood. AJ went to go work at a company called Galaxy Digital, pulled me after as two of the only token maxis at Galaxy. We basically did whatever we could to work on Bitcoin, and so part of that was getting involved with Bitcoin mining. So we helped start the Bitcoin mining team at Galaxy. We then were recruited by Marty Bent to come take over a company now called Cathedra Bitcoin. We're a diversified Bitcoin mining company that's publicly traded in the Toronto Stock Exchange Venture Board. And basically, our company's maxim is that sound money and abundant energy are the keys to human flourishing. And so, not only is this, the stuff that I write about with Entropy is this stuff that I think about, on an ongoing extracurricular basis, but we truly are trying to build a beautiful business at the intersection of Bitcoin and energy. And it seems obvious, again, quote Drew Bansel's Nakamoto conjecture, that eventually Bitcoin mining will saturate the energy sector. And we think there are a lot of interesting opportunities there.
It's fascinating. And then talking about Bitcoin mining, you're based, I think you're based in the US. I'm not sure. I don't want to dox you if you're not public about that. But what's your read of the geopolitical landscape of Bitcoin mining? Like, we have nations in the middle of Southeast Asia, like the Kingdom of Bhutan, who got exposed for mining Bitcoin for 4 years earlier this year. We have countries in the Middle East, like Oman, recently come out and say they're going to invest $1 billion into Bitcoin mining. And then from the way it looks, you have a very like a bifurcation happening in America. You have some states like Texas, who are one of the biggest Bitcoin miners in the world, being very pro on Bitcoin mining, and then you have other states who are not so pro. So looking at it from like maybe a geopolitical lens, where is America situated in this global race for hash?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think after the China ban, the U.S. Found itself having an opportunity, and a lot of the hash rate moved to the U.S. Now, it also moved elsewhere, but really, I think Bitcoin mining is ruthlessly competitive commodity production, and therefore it will go to wherever the power is cheapest, and also wherever the regulatory bodies kind of treat it with the most respect, let's just say. And so, I think there's a lot of talk always about banning Bitcoin, or different states and different regimes banning Bitcoin mining. I think the reality is that no country can ban in Bitcoin. Countries can only ban themselves from Bitcoin. So I think this is one of the very interesting trends to watch right now, is basically where is hash flowing. The advantage that the US has is that we have the best capital markets in the world. And so and we also historically have had a somewhat of a track record of respecting property rights. So I think that's a very, very strong advantage. We've seen different examples, whether it's Kazakhstan inviting Bitcoin miners in and then raising tariffs. Obviously, China did ban Bitcoin mining, but surely there's still Bitcoin mining going on there. So I think this is it's an interesting trend to watch. It basically just is all downstream, though, of who's going to have the cheapest energy and who's going to be the most pro energy, pro humanity. And so I'm hopeful that the U.S. will adopt that stance, but you never know.
As am I. I'm really hopeful America does. I think it just aligns well with the world. The last thing you want to see is China embrace freedom money. I just don't think it makes sense. So I'm really hopeful that, Bitcoin does become this digital declaration of independence for cyberspace, so to say. Drew, I want to be respectful of your time. Is there one big takeaway that you want the listeners to take away from your newest article on Entropy? Or do you think there's something that's really important about it that we maybe didn't get time to discuss today?
It's a great question. I think it's important. Yeah, I would invite any listener to read it in full, because I do think, I mean, there really is so much to HB. It's why it's been this mind virus, and it's just sort of like grabbed hold of me, and I still think about it all the time. Um, and it's funny. As soon as when I was first writing it, I was thinking, oh, surely there's nothing left for me to talk about with HB. Like, this is sort of my last word on HB. But then as time goes on, I think of more and more things, more and more ways, whether it's human psychology. It's hard to trust someone who appears so ordered that you don't see where sort of the chaos is, or where they're, what they sort of will go to for, maybe just relaxing or decompressing or blowing off steam. Like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho is a perfect example of that, right? Like, so on the surface, you don't see the entropy, but it surely does go somewhere. I think if there's anything I would just say is that, it's maybe less to do with entropy, but it's because of entropy. Time is short. Our life is short. You only have so much time. It's just really important to focus on the things that, you find beauty in, that you think create beauty in the world. And me grappling with entropy over the 6 months it took me to write this is basically just me trying to grapple with that myself, and hopefully contribute something interesting. So I think it really just comes down to what type of future do you want to live in. I hope we choose a future of abundant energy and sound money. But that's something that each of us will have to kind of engage with and make happen, or not, on any given day. So
I think that's perfect note to end the podcast on. The only thing more scarce than Bitcoin is time. Drew, thank you so much for your time today.
awesome. Thank you, Luke.
So if you've made it this far into today's video, you're probably going to love the Substack newsletter that we wrote on this topic. That is free, and it's linked down below in the description of today's show. And if you did actually enjoy this deep dive into entropy, energy, and Bitcoin, you're probably going to love the video we filmed looking at the 5 men who predicted Bitcoin more than 5 decades ago. I'm going to pop a link on screen for that video, and if you click it, it's going to take you straight to it. You can click the link to that video right there. And with all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video.